Yo, what is up, my friends? Welcome back into the podcast. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. Guys, today I'm going to be giving you my players that are going to bust in the fantasy playoffs this year. And it's very important that you know to avoid these players so they don't end up costing you your league, and that you need to know not to overvalue these players so they don't end up costing you your league or fantasy championship. So I am going to get right into it, guys, because I have a pretty good list here for you. But real quick, you know the drill. Go down and hit that subscribe button below if you have not already. And if you do enjoy my content today, make sure to give me a thumbs up, as likes help my channel tremendously. That way I can grow my channel and continue to give you content throughout the season and off season. All right, guys. Right before I get started, I wanted to clear something up very, very quickly here. Just because I have a player on my bust list does not necessarily mean that you absolutely and utterly can't play them in the fantasy playoffs. Doesn't mean that you should drop them off your roster. It more or less means that they're being significantly overvalued at the moment. Let me give you a quick example. For example, spoiler alert, Aaron Jones is on my list for my bust players, right? That does not mean that you can't play Aaron Jones as a flex option due to his weekly upside, but he's being valued as a running back 1 or a high-end running back 2, and at this point, that's just too valuable for Aaron Jones. He's being overvalued, being a running back 1 or a running back 2. He's best served as a flex, and I'll get into why here in a second, but that's the reason that he's on my bust list, because he's being overvalued. It doesn't mean drop him off your roster. It doesn't mean that you can't play him at any point or in an emergency for your running back 2 slot, but it means that you need to look for someone else to replace him as your running back 1, and you probably have a better option on your team at this point. So I'm going to get right into my list here, guys, and I'm going to start with both these Packers running backs, starting with the guy I was just talking about, Aaron Jones. Guys, Aaron Jones is simply not getting nearly enough volume now to be valued as a running back 1 or even as a running back 2. I mean, look, A.J. Dillon has clearly taken over the workhorse role for this team. Now, in games where the Packers are playing from behind, Aaron Jones is going to get more work because he's more of the pass-catching back. He's more of a big play back. But this team seems to be trending in the direction that they want A.J. Dillon to be the workhorse back of the team, and then they're going to give Aaron Jones the ball for big play opportunities and scoring opportunities. But this is not good enough to be a running back 1. It's not even good enough to be a running back 2. I'm even scared to play him at my flex because I know there are weeks where he is going to bust tremendously and get you absolutely no fantasy production. I mean, this past week in this game, a high-scoring game against the Bears, he only had 8 touches. Now, granted, he got in the end zone twice because this dude just magically finds a way to get in the end zone. It's like nothing I've ever seen for the few amount of touches that he's gotten over the past 3 years to be getting in the end zone like he is pretty crazy, but the fact of the matter is he finds a way to do it. So due to his weekly upside, is mainly due to his touchdown upside, he can be a flex, maybe a running back 2 in deeper leagues, but he's being significantly overvalued at this point because the fact of the matter is this dude is not a running back 1, being the fact that A.J. Dillon is out carrying him now. He's really not even a running back 2. I know he's coming off a pretty big game, but 2 touchdowns on only 8 touches is extremely fluky, guys. I don't trust this guy whatsoever for the fantasy playoffs, so you need to look for a better option for your running back 1 and running back 2 position. Next on my list is going to be his co-running back, A.J. Dillon. Guys, A.J. Dillon is starting to become the workhorse back for the team and getting the majority of the volume, but Aaron Jones takes all of his scoring opportunities. So his touchdown upside is limited. Granted, he is getting more goal line work now than he was earlier in the season, but Aaron Jones is still the guy that's probably going to score the majority of the touchdowns out of the backfield for these running backs. He gets pretty much all the passing work. So for PPR formats, A.J. Dillon's ceiling is a little bit capped in that regard. And so the fact of the matter is, as long as these two are cutting into each other's workload, they just can't be valued that highly for fantasy and are best used as a flex option or a running back 2 in deeper leagues. Okay, next on my list is going to be DeAndre Hopkins. I know that the DeAndre Hopkins lovers are not going to like this, but look, guys, DeAndre Hopkins has had 2 targets in the past 2 games. 2 targets last week, 2 targets in the week before that, before the Cardinals were on their bye. And look, this team is spreading the ball around, plain and simple. I mean, they have a true they have a true wide receiver 1 in DeAndre Hopkins, talent-wise, but the problem is he's not getting targeted like a wide receiver 1. And people are seeing him as a wide receiver 1 because he's scoring all these touchdowns, but the touchdown numbers this year are insanely fluky. This past game, he had 2 catches, 2 targets, and a touchdown. He's had a lot of games like this year where he's had 5 or less targets and managed to get in the end zone, sometimes a couple of times. These numbers even themselves out, guys. As we know, he's not going to score as many touchdowns down the stretch unless his target share goes up in this offense. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon because they seem to be dead set on spreading the ball around. I don't know if it's because DeAndre Hopkins is a little bit older or what. This dude hasn't lost any talent whatsoever, but he is not being targeted like he was in his dominant fantasy days. And due to his significantly reduced target share, even the fact that he's in a high-scoring offense, he can't be treated as a wide receiver 1. He really can't be treated as a wide receiver 2. And there's going to be people that argue with this because the name, DeAndre Hopkins, he's been getting touchdowns and producing decent fantasy numbers. But guys, if you even cut his touchdowns in half this year, this dude has been an absolute and total bust this fantasy season. And he is best served as a flex option from now on. And through the fantasy playoffs, you should probably look for a different wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 option, either on your bench or even potentially the waiver wire, because I don't trust DeAndre Hopkins whatsoever. Next on my list is going to be James Robinson, guys. James Robinson is really only good when the Jaguars are involved in closer games. Unfortunately, they are getting blown out or beaten to the ground like pretty much right out of the gate in a lot of games this year. And this just isn't going to do it because James Robinson, his volume in these last 2 games when the Jaguars were playing from behind has been absolutely terrible. He only had like 8 touches this past game. This dude is extremely unreliable. He's very boom or bust. He hasn't had a game this year where he's had 20-plus carries, so he's not a true workhorse 1 running back. And considering the fact that he plays in an absolutely terrible offense, I think the amount of touchdowns that he's actually scored this year is a little bit fluky. I think those numbers are going to go down for the rest of the season, and I just don't trust him to have the necessary scoring upside to be a running back 1. I don't trust him to get the volume. I don't trust him to get the yardage. None of the boxes are checked for this guy to really be a good fantasy running back in the playoffs. So what I would do is just completely and totally put this guy on your bench. I wouldn't play James Robinson whatsoever. If you're in a deeper league and you need a flex, maybe. But if you're in a 12-man league or a 10-man league, this guy does not belong in starting lineups, guys. Next on my list is going to be Chase Claypool, guys. This is another player that you need to just have on your bench. I mean, guys, Chase Claypool has all the physical abilities of being a wide receiver 1, but in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense that relies more on running the ball with Najee Harris, checkdowns, short passes to wide receivers, and not really targeting a whole lot of wide receivers downfield, mainly due to Big Ben being older and not having quite the arm that he used to have, Chase Claypool just isn't very valuable in this offense. He's only scored like 2 touchdowns this year. Deontay Johnson is the man in Pittsburgh. He's really the only Pittsburgh wide receiver that you want to start whatsoever. And Chase Claypool does not belong in starting lineups. You need to look for a different wide receiver 2 or a different flex if that's where you've been playing Chase Claypool, because this guy belongs on your bench. Next on my list is going to be Julio Jones, guys. Julio Jones is, look, this guy obviously is one of the most talented wide receivers in the league, but he is on the back end of his career, and we've seen no Derrick Henry and no A.J. Brown in the Tennessee Titans starting lineup, and Julio Jones still isn't producing good fantasy numbers. If he's not producing good fantasy numbers now, he's not going to do it at any point in the season, and the reason that I had to include him on this list is because earlier in the year, I made a few videos talking about the massive league-winning upside that Julio Jones has. I'm sure some of y'all saw my videos on that, and I'm just having to reverse course here and say that I was wrong on that. Julio Jones is not valuable for fantasy whatsoever, and he doesn't belong in your lineup because he's not getting the necessary target share, and even without the 2 other stud offensive weapons in Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown being on the field, Julio Jones still isn't being treated like a wide receiver 1. So if he's not going to get you production now, he's not going to do it at any point in the season, and he does not even warrant flex options at this point. This dude belongs on your bench. Next on my list is going to be Marquise Brown. Guys, Marquise Brown, I was saying it earlier in the season, he performed flukishly well in the first half of the season. He is too undersized. He is too big play dependent. He's on a team that has a quarterback that's pretty inconsistent with his passing efficiency. The Ravens like to target their tight ends a lot and use Lamar Jackson to run the football. So, look, this team just isn't built to produce awesome fantasy numbers for their wide receiver 1. So, with that being the case, Marquise Brown is really not a player that you want to have in your fantasy lineups going forward. He does present a decent weekly upside because of his big playability and being in an offense that actually does put up a decent amount of points, but he's even a potential bust candidate at your flex position, and you might want to look for somebody better. He's definitely not the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 that people are treating him as. We've seen it over the past month. This dude has put up a complete dud in like the last 4 games in a row. This dude is not a starting fantasy wide receiver. He's a flex option at best. All right, guys, I appreciate you tuning into my video today. Obviously, it's fun to talk about the league-winning players, but it's just as important to know who you need to have on your bench and who you need to move out of those running back one spots or wide receiver one spots and maybe move down to just a flex and look for a better option at your main positions because you obviously don't want to have these guys costing you your league. So I appreciate you tuning into the video today, guys. I hope this helped, and I will catch you later.